What is up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Snap on Ego. My name is Brad, otherwise known as Bradsford, and I am joined, as always, by Chris Bootman Boutte. But more importantly, we have a special guest here today. It is the wonderful Jeff Hoogland. Everyone should already know who this is.
Don't start off like that, Brad. It is Hoogland.
I apologize. I read names literally when I see them on my screen, so... See, no, I actually have that. My other friends make fun of me for this because, like, I'm a big hockey fan, and, like, I'll say names correctly if I know the name. But if I'm reading it off of a screen or off of, like, a jersey or whatever, my brain immediately does it phonetically. Like,
yeah, I'm glad I've never had you say my last name without me saying it. But anyways, Jeff, how you doing? What's up? Where can people find you, by the way, for those of us, the 5 people in our audience who don't know where to find you?
You can find me at Jeff Hoogland on most places. I'm also Hooglandia Snap over on the YouTube side, making a lot of stuff in a lot of spaces.
Yeah, and you've been streaming. You've been doing the dual stream thing too, right? Doing to YouTube and the Twitch?
Yeah, it's free to upload now at this point since Twitch gave us a little bit of freedom on our contract. So I've been dual streaming on YouTube and Twitch 5 days a week, Monday through Friday.
Beautiful. Yep, and people can usually find me lurking in there while I'm trying to work too. But yeah, we got a bunch to talk about. But one of the things we wanted to start off with is Marvel Snap conspiracy theories. That's something the 3 of us we try to debunk every now and then. But Jeff, I wanted to ask you, because you've been known to ban 1 or 2 people from your chat, and when people come in there with a conspiracy theory, such as like location batching or matching you up against the exact counter to your deck, you don't tolerate it. Can you break that one down for us so people understand?
Yeah, I think if you give stuff like that room to kind of fester, it can snowball into more than that. And the types of people that are more inclined to kind of put forward those types of ideas are going to have other types of things in the gaming space that are going to be frustrating or annoying or obnoxious in your chat for other reasons. I think the type of individual that's susceptible to believing stuff like that is out to get them is going to have bad takes in other directions as well. So usually you just nip it right in the bud and move on with your day.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Prior to, some people see me mention this, prior to Marvel Snap content, I did a lot of debunking. And like you've mentioned, like the QAnon to like the far right, like pipeline and stuff. I actually made a video essay a while back on Russell Brand because there's this weird like spiritual movement on the left that then becomes conspiracy theorists for like, it was all the COVID nonsense. And yeah, like, it just feels like once people start believing some things without evidence, now they're open up to just so much more. So I'm glad that we have a nice conspiracy-free space in there. But with Marvel Snap, we've had a bunch floating around lately, and a lot of it came from the Mobius one. Mobius getting nerfed right before the She-Hulk bundle. What are your thoughts around that? Do you think there was any merit to them timing it specifically, especially with some of the verbiage they used?
I think like we saw in the over-the-air update notes today from Glenn, they kind of just stepped in it with their phrasing around that original Mobius nerf. It was like never their intention to say, hey, we're releasing this card temporarily and then we're going to pull it back and automatically make it worse. Like, when they release a new card, they try to overshoot a little bit because they don't know exactly where they're going to land. And if they undershoot, it's basically like they didn't release anything, and then we go a week without a new game piece.
Yeah, for sure. Brad, what was your experience like on X, on Twitter? No, we're going to call it Twitter here. What was your experience like the day of the Mobius nerf?
I mean, there's always going to be a lot of people that just think that the rug has been pulled out from underneath them, kind of, so to speak, right? They felt very frustrated, especially when there's money involved, because you have to remember there's a lot of people that actually, rather than opening a Spotlight Cash or spending tokens to get Mobius, they waited for that, 7,000, 8,000 gold bundle that came out?
7,500.
It's 7,500, yeah. So that was gold, it wasn't cash?
It was gold.
Yeah.
Oh, so technically people could have got it for just playing, right?
I mean, they would have had to save up for a fucking while, to be fair. I mean, But yeah, I guess so to speak, they could. But people were, I would say, rightfully upset that a card has been, nerfed, that they paid for, stuff like that. I get that. I understand like balance and things like that. Jeff, you come from Magic as well. I don't know if you remember, but in Pioneer's early days, Kethis was one of the collateral damages from that initial big banning of Inverter and Breach and stuff like that. Kethis was my favorite deck of all time, and I had the deck, and it cost over $1,000 to have the deck in paper. And most of those cards, like Diligent Excavator and all these other cards, like kind of really don't belong in any other Magic deck. So when you lose that kind of thing, like I completely understand firsthand the pain that comes with spending money on something and then losing it in a game because it's no longer viable or usable, or in Magic's case, flat out banned, not allowed to be used at all. So I guess I want to start with that.
I think it's important to point out too, like they didn't just nerf Mobius to start. They gutted the card. Like the norm in Snap is they nerf a card and like you still play it and it still sees plenty of power and is reasonable. Mobius is actually just dead. It's like a first leader pass nerf. They killed the card.
Yeah. And something I was actually explaining to my son. Like, fortunately, my son's not into social media. He's 14 now. But I was explaining to him Hanlon's razor, right? And it was one of the most important things I learned, where it's like never attribute to malice, which could easily be attributed to like stupidity, right? And not saying second dinner's stupid, but like they're human. And I can't even imagine trying to balance a card game,
Well, they made an impulse decision, like they admitted to in the updates today, Like they were like, okay, we have a week and we only had this small window and they had to make the choice in that moment. Do they go off of the week and make the change, or do they do nothing? And then if things don't change, their data set that was kind of worrisome for that week, is going to be there for another 2 months, basically, once you finally get to the window for the next patch and then it deploys again.
Yeah, because in the updates, they were talking about how quickly they moved on it. And Brad, I'm curious your experience with this too. Like, I noticed Mobius kind of dropping off, right? Like the last week or two right before the patch. And it's kind of like what I assumed. I think we talked about it in a previous episode, but like Mobius is just going to come in as kind of like this cop, right? Just policing things, right? Like if certain decks get too powerful, people can just start tossing in Mobius. And it seems like that's what happened the first week or two. Then people stopped playing those decks and people stopped playing Mobius. Yep.
It took people a while to adjust his effect, because if you recall, like when Mobius dropped, we were in that Loki versus Wave dual decks basically, and he was excellent against both those. And I was honestly shocked how even a week into Mobius release, how many people were still just playing Wave. Like I assumed I would put it in everything and then it would dial back. But it's like Marvel Snap players just won't stop playing the cards that Mobius beats up. So like I can't stop playing him because they won't adjust accordingly.
Yeah. Like, how often were you seeing Mobius before the nerf, Brad?
Probably every handful of games, about the same rate that I would see other tech cards like Armor and like Cosmo and things like that. Like you said, Mobius is the kind of card that's going to have those ebb and flow to it. To make another Magic comparison, he's literally Leyline of the Void versus Dredge. Like Dredge comes up really good, and then Leyline gets put in people's sideboards. A la Mobius gets put in people's decks to stop like decks like Negative, or maybe Death's going around a lot or whatever, and then those decks kind of go down a little bit in play rate. Then Mobius is like, well, I got nothing really else to counter at the moment, and then just cycle.
I actually have a really interesting bit of theory craft, because you called out Death as a card people might want to play Mobius into, and I would actually put forward that 2/3 Mobius was actually actively good for the decks that wanted to be playing Death, because the slot he competed for in decks was typically something like Armor.
Yeah.
And while Mobius definitely wasn't good for Death, Armor was significantly worse for decks that wanted to play Death. So kind of like, oh, this card makes my one card awkward, but the alternative to them playing the card that makes my one card awkward is my deck stops working when they draw it completely.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Now they can do both. Look at that curve.
Yeah, so real quick, too, before we dive fully into the OTAs, Brad, you and I discussed this on Discord just a little bit. So what do you take away from this, where they talk about We'll continue to keep an eye on Mobius and spend playtest cycles looking at other versions of his effect that oh, there's like a typo in here, that he is closer to the original than the on reveal did, just in case it turns out we need one. In the spirit of additional transparency, that effort is starting with 2-3 on turn 6. Your costs can't be increased and your opponent's costs can't be reduced. So basically like a leech, right? So like they're thinking about doing that. Like, is that what you, like they have that planned in the future for a patch? Is that what you guys take away from that?
I mean, I take it the same way I took it originally when they first made, like, we'll talk about this in the OTA, but they have, like Jeff alluded to, they have that little blurb that they talked about where people kind of ran with saying you released a card with the intention of nerfing it, and they kind of clarified on that. I initially took that as we're going to push the envelope like we always do. We always want new cards to be fun and exciting, and we're going to have some backup plans in like on the, like the back burner ready to go if we need it. If we need to do something, we will gladly kind of go backwards a little bit. It's not saying we're intentionally setting forth to do so without even understanding the data moving forward. And this is the exact same thing. It's just preemptively saying, look, we're going to try this. This is what we're going for, but in the next few weeks, months, or whatever, we have ideas for how to adjust this because we know this is a polarizing effect and we need other ways to kind of pivot. And they're just saying that up front. And I don't know. It just drove me insane that people didn't get that. And the first time around, I'm like, I don't think they're saying they're intentionally going to nerf something preemptively just to, because I think it was poor wording on their part originally.
Yeah. Yeah, like, what, Jeff, I'm curious your thoughts. Well, Brad, too. Like, you guys have been in the card game, seen a lot longer than me. Like, Second Dinner is very transparent. Like, I'm in a few other games, gaming communities and stuff, and I don't see this much communication, but, like, this new OTA, there's, like, multiple pages and a lot of explanation. Like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Like, if you owned a business, Jeff, would you be this transparent? You know, because, like, I wonder, because it gives... like Brad was just discussing, it gives the community a lot to just interpret however the hell they want. Personally, I love it. That's where I stand. I'm like, this is good. It's like net positive.
I'm inclined to agree with you. I think it's good. I prefer it from a consumer side, but I also think it's probably not an accident that most other companies and games in the space don't communicate like this. So I'm curious to see in the longer term, does this work out for them? Because, the more communication they give, the more opportunities there are for them to kind of step in it a little bit like they did in the patch notes, right? Like, a big chunk of this communication they're doing right now is because of how they communicated previously. Like, the more you say, the more is open for interpretation, like you said. And as everybody knows, like on the internet, the average person takes the least charitable interpretation possible if they're looking to be angry. And gamers are often looking to be angry.
Yeah, just a little bit. What about you came from like Yu-Gi-Oh! And some other games too, Brad. Like, have you ever seen like a developer or like card game creator?
So WotC or Wizards of the Coast is, when it comes to their ban announcements, when they actually have one, for the most part, they're pretty good about saying, this is why we did this is what we're doing, et cetera, et cetera. They're really hit or miss though sometimes. I wish they would have just like check-in ones of like, this is what we're looking at, even though we're not banning something, which they have before. So WotC's like in the middle ground. Konami, on the other hand, with Yu-Gi-Oh! Just, here's your ban list if we have one. This is what got banned. No reasoning, no description whatsoever, because you should know. You should know why these things are banned. It's just like, have fun. And like that was always really sucked. So, I've seen both halves of it.
So I want to ask you both this, and I'll touch on it myself for a minute. So like, before we move into the OTAs, here's a question I always ask myself, because like, humans in general are driven by incentives, right? And when people are giving just the most bad faith interpretations of Second Dinner, I don't understand what they think, why Second Dinner would do this, right? Like, why would Second Dinner match you up against counter decks, right? Decks that completely counter you. Why would Second Dinner bash locations just to screw you over? Why would Second Dinner have you buy a card, right, and then nerf it just to sell She-Hulk bundles? Like, if I'm looking at that, like, that makes me not want to buy things, right? It makes me not want to spend in game. It makes me worried about spending my tokens. Clearly, they're worried about people hoarding tokens. That's why part of the spotlight system came out, right? So, like, I always try to understand people with these silly beliefs. Like, why would they do this? And the only answer I can think of is like they literally think they're evil. That's what they think it is. They're just like, oh nope, they're evil. They're just like screwing with me. Any insight? You guys ever think about this, or am I alone on that?
I think it's more so the idea of whether or not it's, something conscious. People love to be a contrarian for the sake of just being one and being like, everyone's against me. I'm the main character in this story. It's my life. So I get to be on the good side of things. And I think this is a big part of it. I mean, look at why do flat earthers exist? Because it's a contrarian type of thing, right? And I'm sorry if we have 3 people in our entire audience that are flat earthers.
Hopefully not.
I'm offending you. Like, whatever. Like, it's because you ask them, it's like, well, why are all these people, like all the scientists, all the government officials in the entire world, why are they all working together to spread this one lie? And they're like, just for control or whatever. I'm like, that doesn't fucking make sense. And neither does half the shit that people complain about second dinner. So like, I think it's mostly for the sake of wanting to do it.
I think part of the gameplay conspiracy theories come from a place of looking for a scapegoat a lot of the time. It's not my fault I can't climb the ladder. It's not my fault I'm not winning these games or doing well. The deck was stacked against me. The locations were rigged. The shuffler was rigged. The matchup was rigged against me. And I did my best, but all of these other things were really unfair. And that's just why I am where I am. Not I need to build my decks better, or I need to sequence my cards better, or think about my choice and the things I can control. By removing the cause for the result that they're getting, they're no longer responsible for it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, I'm a big nerd. I read books about conspiracy theorists to try to understand. And yeah, people are looking for like a cause, a reason why their life is a certain way, or why things are happening, quote unquote, to them. But you stream like 7-8 hours a day. How do you manage just like terrible RNG runs, right? Like, because you don't think second dinner's just out to get you, but the game does its thing quite often.
I used to fly across the country to lose round 1 to missing my 3rd land drop in game 3. Taking a bad beat at half a dozen or a dozen games a row in my basement for free when I got paid a full day's work for the day. It's just like, I'll try again tomorrow. It's like, whatever. It's not a big deal.
So that's what we need to do.
I was born in the variance, okay? Molded by it.
I do not recommend playing competitive Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh or any of these card games. Please, if you love yourself, like, they're fun, play with your friends, but don't get into the competitive scene. Like RCQs, PPTQs, YCSs, they're not fun. They're just not.
I often share the tidbit that my best year traveling to play competitive tournament Magic, I made $21,000 in prize money. I finished 2nd on the tour I was playing in. And when tax time came around, I totaled everything up, and I spent $19,000 on cards, travel expenses, and food while I was out and about. So, broke even.
Yeah. You just posted a video recently. You're doing a little bit better with Marvel Snap, huh?
Correct. Yeah. A little bit better than the old grinder days.
Tiny bit. So yeah, we had a massive OTA. So let's jump into it. I don't have the bandwidth to read this entire thing, but second dinner, they talk about the balancing act. That's difficult. And then they talk about Mobius. Was there anything that you guys had to take away from like that beginning part? Like, I often wonder and think about what it's like to balance the game, right? One of the anecdotes I always share was when I first started playing the game, which was almost a year ago, leader was being leader. And I made like 2 or 3 rant videos about this fucking card. Like, I was losing it, right? And I wasn't around previously for the Death Wave. So when they nerfed leader, Death Wave just came out, right? Like, it came back and I was like, oh my God, this is why we needed leader. Now it makes sense. And since then, I've never like freaked out about like balancing cards. I'm like, hey, just trust Glenn. Let him do his thing. It's almost like when a species is like eating another species and keeping it in check. You know what I mean? So
if you want to go a layer deeper than that onion, even Chris, back before Leader and Deathwave existed, Magic could create Limbo on turn 6 in the beta. And people often ask, they're like, okay, why were metagames kind of turbulent after Snap released after such a lengthy closed beta? It's like, we basically played a different game in the closed beta because Magic made Limbo on turn 6 almost right up until the game released. And then that just blew the door wide open basically when that was no longer a thing.
Yeah, no, yeah, I hear some stories from back in the beta, but yeah, do you guys think they, like, Jeff, started with you, like, do you think they did a good job? Like, this is a very extensive, like, OTA that they put out with like a bunch of notes. Like, do you think they did a good job explaining it? Like, I guess my question is, do you think people, even though they'll always be able to, do you think they're going to be able to take this and misconstrue it and pick it apart and think they're still evil? It's like, I think they did a pretty good job explaining why they do what they do and clarifying what they meant on previous statements.
I am excited to see the new and interesting ways everything that was explained here is modeled around maximizing second dinner, making money on bundles.
Interesting. What about you, Brad?
Yeah, they did a good job of explaining it. I think they look, like, I was starting to put this slideshow together and I was trying to fit whatever like they talked about in this first slide, and I was like, fuck.
Yeah,
I started and I'm like, I can't fit shit into this slide to make it look good. So I just put this. There's a lot. You should read it. And I encourage everyone that's watching you should definitely check out the OTA and read it, at least those first couple of pages, just to get an idea of what they're discussing. They go over a balancing act. They go over the difference between patches and OTAs, and they talk about what happened with Mobius, which I guess we should just start with what happened with Mobius. They essentially say that they went on to, like Jeff alluded to earlier, they were looking at some data in front of them, and what freaked them out internally was they didn't consider the impact that Jeff would have on players coming in from pools 2 into 3 and like those early games where you get like death for the first time and stuff like that, and like them getting matched up with players in similar pools that happen to go buy with tokens or spotlight caches or with that bundle Mobius. And it was terrifying from their end to see the amount of like dip in all these decks and these archetypes that he just kind of wipes out for those kind of players. And so they were like, okay, well, we have to figure out, do we wait or do we just push the patch through? Which, by the way, they repeat this again. Patches they have to put in 2, 3, sometimes a month in advance, or 2 or 3 weeks or a month in advance on occasion, to make sure they can actually get it pushed through. That is not on them. That is Apple. That is Google. That is Steam. So really, if you think about it, for all those people complaining and wanting to have conspiracy theories about second dinner, you should be blaming Google, Apple, and Steam for having these super long waiting periods to just kind of approve an update or not. But they essentially go on to say that's why they kind of hit the panic button on Mobius and they go forward from there. And they said it was the wrong call. Whoopsies. The meta calmed down. They should have waited. And like Jeff said earlier, they are human and they make mistakes. That is okay. But unfortunately, in the eyes of your consumers, when you are a big corporation, you're not allowed to make mistakes.
Not even a big corporation. I think they got like less than 100 people for sure.
Doesn't matter, Chris. They could have 3 people as far as everyone knows, and they would be a big old bad corporation.
Yeah. So, Jeff, what do you think about Mobius being a 3/3 with his old ability for now?
I think it ends up being just the kind of perfect new card, honestly. I think the play rate was already falling down as a 2/3 and might have even continued to trail off a little bit. And as a 3/3, it's going to just literally be a, do you have a bad matchup into a specific thing? And I know it's kind of cliche to say it whenever a card becomes a 3-drop, they're like, oh, this is a Surfer card now. But like, as someone who's been playing Surfer with like the Werewolf release recently, the one genuinely kind of unwinnable matchup for that deck was the Loki matchup. So like now you have a 3-drop that helps you solve the specific problem that you're having. So there will be at least one deck in the metagame that wants to play this card. But honestly, I struggle to see others that really want to. 3 energy is such a pivotal point for a lot of decks in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what, like, kind of made me salty? Like, they're so concerned about the early pool players. Like, I didn't get Sarah until, like, my second to last card. when I was like in pool 3. So like I was dealing with just Mobius without Mobius, you know what I mean? I had no cost reduction, and now they're like concerned about like what these people are gonna be able to do. But yeah,
Well,
like
kids today with their newfangled free Series 3 card every
right,
month, they can get Sarah almost right away. They'll never know what it's like to go to school
yeah,
uphill in the snow.
they still bitch about the economy too. I'm like, you're getting free cards. You got this cool little key that you get to put into this fucking spotlight caches and stuff like that. But you know what drove me nuts, real quick, is sorry to go back to the conspiracies, but I've literally seen people call Second Dinner liars because they're making a non-just like numbers change to a card. They're like, you lied to us. You said you couldn't do that. Like, I asked somebody on Twitter, I'm like, so are you telling me that you don't think video game technology can change and new code can come around? Like, did you guys see anybody accusing them of lying because of this?
Yeah. Do you know how many people I replied to that? And there's someone that replied to a quote tweet I had I basically quote tweeted someone that said I guess that was a lie then. And I explained the difference between OTAs and patches and what happened. And then someone was like, how do you have the energy to reply to people like this? And I was like, I'm already dead inside. That's why. It's like, it is a little ridiculous. And I think it's also, we have to give the benefit of the doubt. Okay. We have to remember, even though these are people that are online on Twitter, and assuming they're also involved in like the subreddit in some capacity, or like Discord, or even if it's just Twitter, they have the pulse, their finger on the pulse a little bit, but they don't have it enough to actually go and seek out information. They just scroll, see what the fuck, I'm going to complain, and then they kind of move on with their life. They don't really seek out any other information, even though people are like, check the Discord, check the team answers, check all this. They're not going to look. If they weren't looking before, they're not going to change. They're not going to look now. They're just going to live in their, that whole ignorance is bliss thing, right? That's where they want to be. That's their bubble. So to give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit is,
I learned that trying to send like news and science articles to like QAnon conspiracy theorists. I just gave up. I'm like, whatever. But yeah, Jeff, like in chat, like how did your community respond when this was announced? Because you actually mentioned that Second Dinner thankfully announced this before the She-Hulk bundle came out, right? Yep. Like, why was that a good move? And how did Twitch chat react?
I think my chat was pretty like you mentioned at the start of the thing. Like, I pretty much stomp and tap down people that are on an extreme end of the spectrum, and I think a lot of people in my community, especially, were kind of on the side of, it was kind of silly to adjust him to begin with, so him coming back even in a bit of a weakened state here as a 3/3 was just like yeah, that's fine. And honestly, I think looking at all the data, the biggest thing that was surprising to me is just how little the metagame actually changed between Mobius being a 2/3 ongoing and the state where he's currently unplayable. Like, there's like some She-Hulk Infinite decks that people are playing again, but honestly, with Mobius's play rate going down, I'm not certain that those couldn't have organically have just popped back up again as the hate card like started being played less.
Yeah, I definitely think that was a psychological thing. Like, people could have been playing She-Hulk most of the time without running into their counter. You know what I mean? But Brad, what do we got for this next OTA? Tell us about it.
Oh, we got a wonderful Sorcerer Supreme.
Look at you, so fancy.
I know, and I'm going to tell you right now. I basically like was trying to Photoshop or like real quick like stuff or like to get these up, and Doctor Strange was the worst one because I was being lazy and trying to do like the one like the auto removal and stuff like that. I didn't really feel like spending too much time on this because I put this together about 20 minutes before we went live, and all of his variants are a nightmare to Photoshop out of the frame. All of them. Because he always has the mystical bullshit on his hands, and the fucking Photoshop or whatever else I was trying to use is just like, I don't know what the fuck's going on here.
It probably would have been easier if you just put the fucking card. You could have just put the card.
Yeah, but then it's the wrong stats.
They have in the assets now for us creators, since they treat us so well, which is why we shill for them, they have it without the stats now. Have you seen that in the folder? I'll show you.
Nope, because I have to re-download the entire fucking thing again, and I don't want to do that.
Whatever, just read the OTA. Read the OTA. And poor Glenn, chopping off his sweet hair.
Doctor Strange used to be a 3/3 on reveal, move your highest power cards to this location. He's now a 2/3. That's it. He's cool. And they kind of talk about like fondly working with your first move deck, all that good stuff. And they want to just kind of bring him back to the forefront of move decks. Because most times if you're playing a dedicated move list, you're probably still cutting him. Even like in later collections. I don't know if that changes much now with him a 2/3. It might. It makes him fit a bit better in certain places, I think. Like as far as your curve goes, same thing we saw with Ghost Spider going down to a 1. But probably still gets cut. I think he's probably still not good enough.
All right, this is gonna be the Spider-Man 2099 enabler, right? We're just like constructing our deck, so 6 power is the highest, and on turn 6, we're grabbing him, we're moving him, we're popping someone off. It's gonna be glorious.
Do you think? Yeah, like I don't. Maybe that's the deck Glenn's been talking about. He's been fooling around with the buff Doctor Strange, and that's the Amazing Spider-Man 2099. Well, I don't know, Jeff. Do you have any ideas for this? Do you think it'll fit?
Whenever I see a change like this, I always ask myself the questions like, okay, what can I do differently with this card with the change stat line that I couldn't do before? And like the big function case that jumps out for this card is, okay, I'm playing this card not on curve on turn 2. This is like part of my turn 4 play, turn 5 play, turn 6 play, right? And on 6, especially, the big difference between a 3/3 and a 2/3 is this plays alongside something like Shang-Chi or Enchantress or some other 4 energy card as a 2 play at the end of the game action that could generate a big swing.
Are you gonna slot him into any kind of like torch bounce or anything like that? You gonna experiment with it?
That's actually a decent thought. Yeah, like picking him up with Beast, suddenly he's a 1/3 now, is potentially very appealing as well.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, my issue is like whenever I've played like the dedicated like move, it just seems way too cluttered. I've been happier with like kind of like the Silk kind of bouncing around and just manually moving like your Nightcrawler and Jeff and stuff. Like when Doctor Strange is out there, it just seems like everything gets all muddied up.
Well, yeah, it's one of the things that the traditional move decks have always struggled with that I think a lot of people don't understand from a perspective that's not super obvious is I actually think the big reason why those like Vulture and Human Torch decks just struggle to be competitive is actually because of location variance. There's so many random locations where you're like, well, that's the center location of this game. Guess none of my cards work now. They get completely gummed up and stop functioning that it suffers a lot in a lot of situations like that.
Yeah, and you know what? That girl Nico, with her move something to the right, never helps. Never helps. I'll get the far left location as like Sanctum or some shit. It's ridiculous. But all right, Brad, let's move on to the Piece de Resistance, the big change. What do we got?
It is Shang-Chi. I know. Look at that. Look at that sweet variant. Doesn't it look great? Oh, fantastic. Shang-Chi. He's still a 4/3, guys. He has not changed in that regard, but his text has changed a teeny bit. Rather than destroying cards that are 9 or more power, the baseline is now 10. And we're going to get into a few other cards following this in which they've been changed or brought up.
Should we just run through them so people get the whole picture?
Sure, real quick. Let's go. We got the Monster is next. Nothing to see here. It's just the monster. He's a 6/10 now, so Shang-Chi can kill him.
Look who didn't mind having the wrong stats. Look at that. He lied to me,
because I gave up on photoshopping. And I also the She-Hulk. So okay, here when I photoshopped this one, like it messed up with the word or whatever. I was like, nah, I don't have time for this. And then She-Hulk, I wanted to use this bundle, and I'm like, this is gonna be a nightmare to fucking do whatever. So
I just love how you were acting like a perfectionist like 2 slides ago. You're like, oh, I couldn't.
Okay. To give you remember, when I was doing the other slides, I had like 20 minutes to go. When I was doing these slides, I had 3 minutes to go. So
all right, point taken. All right, go through them. So
She-Hulk's a 6/10. Yep, she's a 6/10 now. We'll get back to the nitty gritty of why they did stuff. And we got Warpath. He's also a 6/10. The reason for Warpath is really cool because they acknowledge him as a very powerful early card in for new players, and they want Shang-Chi to still be a counter for that still. And then the other ones don't really involve Shang-Chi too much, so let's go back a little bit. We'll get to those in a bit.
Well, what about Strong Guy, the strongest man, and Jessica Jones?
I just said they kind of involve him, but not really. Jessica Jones is a 4/9. doesn't get hit by Shang-Chi now. Strong
Right,
guy
right.
goes up to a 3/9, doesn't get hit by Shang-Chi now. You need to present some patience, Chris. We can't do all of this at once.
All right,
Here's one on Shang-Chi. Has there ever been a change in an OTA that's going to have a bigger, more sweeping impact than this?
Yeah, I don't think so. My brain's just been going ever since we saw
unless
these.
unless Chavez is eventually reworked and that's via an OTA, I would tend to agree with you, Jeff. Yeah.
It's just like this is
Oh,
like this card has defined so much over the course of Marvel Snap's first year. It's just even when it's not the most common tech card, you're just like looking at your deck and you're like, do I really want to put this first Shang-Chi target in my deck? Is that worthwhile?
yeah. So what are you seeing? Like, what went through your head? Like, as far as like deck building, locations, stuff like that, or combinations of cards that you think are going to be most affected by this, or is this one of those things where it's almost like Mobius, where it's like we got to wait and see to see how things like shift because it's going to be so dramatic.
Not
What
sure
I think
about that
the
one.
immediate thing that jumps out to me is that the ceiling on how much power you can put into a lane and not have it exposed to Shang-Chi still, like that goes up 4 points basically, right? Like you can theoretically have 3/9s now where previously you could only have 3/8s. So like you can get to 36 without worrying about being chopped down in a theory.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Brad?
So one thing I'm trying to wonder is typically I don't know if you guys agree with this, but I've always thought that the best stat line in the game as far as like rate is a 5/8 because it's the highest power you can get underneath Shang-Chi on a 5 drop, and that's just kind of like that perfect baseline. We've seen plenty of cards that really excel at that stat line. Do you think they're going to eventually bring that up to a 5/9? Do we see Arrow go to a 5/9? Do we see some of these other, like maybe Modoc, go to a 5/9 at some point to kind of raise up a little bit in conjunction with Shang-Chi, or do they just kind of say we'll get to those later?
Huh? You have any thoughts, Jeff?
I think it'll depend on need. Like we're see them proactively adjusting a handful of cards here, but they're basically just giving themselves an extra turn on the dial. Because when Shang-Chi was hitting 9 power things, you couldn't tick from 8 to 9 as a balancing tool because it was a downgrade in most situations. And now
Yeah.
they've just like opened it so they have an extra notch in every one of these 5 drops now where like, okay, we need to push this card a little bit. We can now do this without putting it into the danger zone, basically.
And
Yeah.
speaking of going from downgrade to upgrade, you have to look at the ones that are no longer hit by Shang-Chi, the ones that stay at 9 powers. So, of course, that's going to be Abomination, Black Cat, Living Tribunal, and I'm missing one, right? One more? It's probably even
Rescue.
Rescue. My
Rescue,
Rescue.
girl
right?
And
Rescue.
Rescue's a huge one. She's a card that I think's been close for a long time, but the way she's templated, even if you didn't have priority, she still died to Shang the following
Yeah.
turn because she got buffed when you staged your cards, not when they actually got
Mm.
played. So her no longer getting chopped down by this card's a big deal. I think she's going to be a very playable 4 drop.
Yeah. I previously played a few decks that ran like rescue into Professor X. That was like the only thing I could do and feel comfortable with it. You know what I mean? But now with her being a 4/9 without having to worry about Shang-Chi, like that is huge. Do you guys see Shang-Chi's his play rate dropping at all? Or do you think people are still gonna be keeping him in most decks as that singular tech card
He's
when
he's the biggest ebb and flow card in the game. Like when we have these small metas, like when Silky Smooth was like the top deck, or even like Loki for an example, because more often than not, Shang-Chi, yes, can counter a collector, but the good Loki players are able to kind of work around that. Which, by the way, now they can go up to 9 with their collectors
Yeah.
rather than stop at 8. But the good players would stop at 8 and make sure that they have a fixed amount for that, or put a Cosmo behind him or whatever. And typically, Shadow King was the better answer for the most part to things like the Collector. But I do think that Shang-Chi is like, yeah, really this weird ebb and flow card where like if we're in a meta where there's like a lot of Darkhawk, a lot of Devil Dino, or just like Shuri, like those kind of decks kind of are the top, like the top. Then Shang-Chi's going to raise up in stock. When it's Silky Smooth, when it's Loki and stuff like that, maybe a bit more smaller stuff, it kind of goes down. We're in this weird middle ground where Destroy is really popular, so there's a bunch of great targets for Shang-Chi there, but then you also worry about buffing up their null, and Destroy players have gotten better about playing around their own energy output with things like X23 and making sure that they're able to dodge priority and even kill their own things in an awkward fashion to buff up their null later on and go with like null and like what Taskmaster I've seen like on 5 and 6. So I don't know. Shang-Chi's a weird card, but I think this is just an awesome change.
All right, Chris. I just figured out the next conspiracy theory that we can work off this Shang-Chi change. So one card that's notably absent from the list of things that get really beneficial from this Shang-Chi change is Werewolf by Night. That recent Series 5 powerhouse. Like, that card now gets to trigger 3 times and still not be Shang-Chi-able. They called out Ronin and Devil Dino as cards that are sometimes on that 9 breakpoint, but that 9 breakpoint was a big deal for Wolf, where you can now queue up 3 going into that final turn and still be not in danger.
Any bundles on the horizon that we should be looking into? Here's something too. I'm curious how people are going to react to this too, with Shadow King being everywhere. Like, I love me some Shadow King. Nice little 2/3. What are you guys' thoughts? Do you think Shadow King needs to get a nerf? Like at a 2/3, like I can Shang and Shadow King on turn 6. It's beautiful.
Cool.
I need Shadow King to be nerfed to a 2/2 because my Cerebro 2 deck is this close, Chris. It's this close.
You just gotta play Cerebro 3. You gotta just join us over in the Cerebro 3 with Valkyrie and Bass.
Cerebro 3 already lost Magic, and the Cerebro 2 is really I think Cerebro 2 is in a good spot. Almost there.
Yeah.
You just need that Shadow King.
Speaking of Shadow King, I think the buff that we saw to Shadow King down to that 2 energy card, I think that was almost them trying to have this last ditch effort where they're like, okay, do we need to adjust Shang-Chi, or can we actually hit his play rate by making these other similar S-Tech cards just that much more appealing? And we saw in this most recent metagame that we had that Shadow King fell off again, and on the untapped tracker at least, Shang-Chi was back up to his 25 to 30% range like he had often been in the past, which I'm sure contributed to them finally pulling the trigger on changing this card.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I just see people complain about Shadow King, so much and stuff, and like I'm just like, I think he's fine, especially because he got so much hate. I've believed in Shadow King so long. I bought him for 6,000. Like, he was one of the first cards I bought, just because I wanted to counter the Silver Surfer meta, right? And then they nerfed Silver Surfer, so he was just like kind of just sitting there. But he used to be like a 4 cost, wasn't he? Something insane.
He was the same stat line.
You gotta remember all the January cards were originally balanced around Zabu reducing cards by 2. So like their original costs on Dazzler and Shauna and Shadow King just aren't real life because Zabu was supposed to look very different.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what else? Jeff, how happy are you about Jessica Jones though? She got a little bit of a buff.
As someone who has played an unhealthy amount of Storm into Jessica Jones in my complete collection, I have that variant with a gold background on it, and it's beautiful, and I am excited for that to be, let's say, marginally less embarrassing.
So, but we were talking about Rescue, and it seems like Jessica Jones and Rescue have been right there. And I think I might have heard you before say you play Jessica Jones because Rescue can get a Shang-Chi. Like, do you have any like conflicted feelings now? Like, are you gonna have to cheat on Jessica with Rescue?
Well, I think you'll be able to pick and choose depending on what type of deck you want to play, right? Like, Jones is obviously a natural follow-up for Storm, which is great. Like now your Storm into Jessica Jones is 11 points worth of stats, and that extra number might not seem like a lot, but a lot of the games that extra point's going to be the difference between whether or not you're beating a Doom bot into that path or not.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Brad? Any final thoughts on the OTA?
I mean, I guess we should talk about Strong Guy, right?
Maybe. I don't know. That poor guy. He's not.
I mean, okay,
he's not,
hold on. I do want to touch on this.
You don't think Strong Guy's going to be good, Chris?
I don't know. It's just so hard to meet the condition of clearing out your.
No,
your
it's not. You're very wrong.
I played him in that one. What was it? It was like the Zukula deck, like low cost cards with Dracula. And remember, like, I don't know how long ago it was. It was like maybe last month. One of your Discord members like submitted it or something, or it was during deck submissions. I think that was the only time I played it, but I don't even know how many times I got his buff. I don't know. Sell me on it. Sell me on Strong Guy.
Well, I think there's new Strong Guy decks with him being a 3-drop. Like, so back during the closed beta, this card was a 2-drop, and it was a staple inside of Sarah Spew decks. And if you have a Sarah, this card is now a 2/9, which is like an absurd stat line, right? Like, and in terms of getting your hand empty, you add a copy of even Colleen Wing to mix well, and suddenly you've spent 3 energy on 13 points worth of stats on your final turn, and you still have room to fit a Shang-Chi in there with your Sarah discount, or a Killmonger and another 1-drop, and that's just like a lot of points in a big swing.
But here's my question. Do you think people have not been playing Strong Guy? Like, he's one of the least played cards. Like, do you think people have not been playing him because they were like, oh man, people got Shang-Chi?
No,
you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Because he's a 4-cost. 4-cost is one of the most competitive spots in the entire game. And when you're just as weak as he was, even as a 4/9, which is nothing to scoff at, really. I mean, look at something like Man-Thing, for example.
He was a 4/10, actually.
4/10, you're right. But look at something like Man-Thing, who is a 4/5 that can effectively be something that matches or exceeds Strong Guy's stat line when you do all these hoops to jump through and like stuff like that. Or look at Darkhawk, or now the new Miss Marvel is a great card to have in a lot of decks. 4-cost is so competitive in terms of like how good these cards are. He's of course not going to see play in that regard. But 3-drops is something that I'm really excited to see him in, because I think the 3-drop, and another reason as to why Mobius's play rate is probably going to go down quite a bit as he's entering this fold. It's where most decks truly start their game plan. Look at like Lockjaw, Thor, all the destroy cards, 2 of them being Venom and Deathlock at 3. You have Rockslide at 3 in the Darkhawk deck and stuff like that. Technically, you can say Darkhawk starts at Korg and stuff like that, but oftentimes they might miss their Korg and start on Zabu. And those tech cards like to live in the 2-drop spot, like Armor. So having a 3-drop where you really start establishing your game plan is where this is going to be a nice home. And of course, you can follow up with now the newly buffed 4/8 Hellcow after this card as well. I think there are a lot of cool little avenues to go with. I think maybe there's something to be had about the classic hand size deck that ran like Swarm and stuff like that, but didn't really care about the APOC at the top end, or like MODOK, and it was like running Nakia to like buff the hand and get your swarms bigger and that kind of thing. This might revitalize that deck in some kind of way. I'd have to figure out exactly how you kind of build around that core. But yeah, I'm with Jeff. I think this is going to be an actually playable card. It's no longer going to be bottom 10.
I'll wait to see what you guys cook up. I'll see and see if I get see if I get sold on it. But we got like 10 minutes left. And I want to discuss, because you two being the card gamers you are, Brad actually educated me on what exactly sideboards are. And I've heard you mention it too in Conquest mode. So like, Jeff, what are your thoughts on Conquest mode? And you've mentioned using sideboards. Like, if you got to go into second dinner and they said, Jeff, redesign Conquest mode for us, how would it look? Like health, sideboards?
For people that aren't familiar with sideboard, for starters, a sideboard or a side deck is a small number of cards that at set points during the game, you get to exchange cards from your starting 12-card deck 1-to-1 with cards in your sideboard to kind of adjust your deck for the matchup that you're playing. And I think the number one misconception I commonly hear parroted at me when I talk about sideboards, they're like, well, Jeff, sideboards would just be 2 or 3 or however big they are, just tech cards, and there would be it would make the game more polarized. And my response to that is always the same. The tech cards are already being played. When you look at all of the decks that are consistently the best in Conquest, there are decks typically that are already playing Killmongers and Shang-Chi's and Armors and Cosmos and Luke Cages. And what, in my opinion, a sideboard would likely do for Conquest is it would allow decks that are weak to tech cards to have counterplay to them. It would mean my deck that's weak to Mobius, for example, but can't afford to play Rogue or Enchantress in the main deck slot, gets to put Rogue and Enchantress potentially if it's the only card we care about in the sideboard, and now I have counterplay. You can also just, something that's common in games like Magic is you just pivot post sideboard where I know I'm weak to this particular card, so I pull out just my cards that are weak to that card and bring in other generically good cards, and now I'm more fair in the post sideboard games where my primary game plan is a little bit more tame and my deck is just a higher average power level.
Yeah. So what would it look like if it was up to you? What would it look like in Conquest mode? Like, would it be?
So I think that's
or...
one of the that's one of the spaces where you could really innovate in this space. And I think one of the reasons Snap has been so successful is the innovation that it's done is there's a ton of different ways you could implement sideboards. You wouldn't even have to have it be symmetrical, I don't think. Like, one interesting idea is when you lose a game, you get to swap one card. And so there's a different person swapping each time. You could also do it where when you drop below a certain cube total, you get to sideboard one time and that's it. So one person sideboards when they drop, and then when the other person drops, they sideboard. And there's just so many different dynamics or ways you could do it. You could say, okay, after round 3, regardless of cube totals, both players swap cards. And I genuinely don't know which of these ideas or other ideas for how you could implement it would be optimal, but I think that would be neat to play with from a strategy perspective.
Yeah. Brad, I'm sure you put some thought into this. How would you do it?
Yeah, I actually always thought about the below a certain threshold for cubes. I think that's where I would go with it. Like when you drop to 50%, right? You've lost, like what? It's 10 cubes in Conquest, right?
Yeah.
I should know this by now with the amount of Conquest I play. I just kind of like, yeah, we lost 8, cool. But yeah, I think dropping below 50% is where I would probably start. And I do like the idea of like you drop below 50%. Then you can do it when I do, whatever. So like if you have a huge advantage in the first place, then you probably shouldn't be able to sideboard initially to continue that advantage, at least in the way Conquest is. I would like to see an additional game mode of a best of, I would say best of 5 with how short Marvel Snap games are. Play 2 games, and then just like in Magic, if there is a best of 5 in like tournament level, where it's like the finals and things like that, then it's play 2, sideboard after game 2, and then that's when you can do it then. But I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, but I think sideboards would be massive for the game in general.
Past just sideboards, from a pure structure perspective, I also really hope Second Dinner considers playing with the cube totals that we talked about. I actually think 10 is quite possibly the absolute worst amount of starting cubes they could have picked. I think 8 would be better from you lose an 8 cuber and it's over. And if you don't want people to lose an 8 cuber and be over, you want them to actually be able to come back. I think 12 is a much better number than 10, because losing an 8 cuber and then having to win 3 4 cubers is so much more realistic and feasible and less soul crushing than having to try and win 5 2 cubers. I also think if you're worried about, well, that's going to make the game take longer, you could do other things to compensate, like say, okay, we're starting with 12 cubes, but high stakes rounds start round 3 now instead of round 5. So you're compressing the time in one way where you might be extending it in another, so your average game length still ends up being the same for a match.
Yeah. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being like maybe they'll, or 1 being I have no hope at all, 10 being maybe they'll include sideboards. Where are you guys at? Because I swear to God, I think I remember somewhere someone asking Glenn about this, and he was just like, no. He's like, nope, we're a fast game. We're all about the quickness. Not going to do it. Like, do you guys have any hope that Glenn's heart will change in this regard?
To be fair, when that was asked, I think Conquest at that point was like maybe a month old when that question came up. Now that Conquest has had time to kind of, cook and like simmer and everything, I do think Glenn is probably going to be a bit more open to it than he previously was. So I would probably put myself at like a 6, like as far as like the likelihood that they might do it down the road. I think the thing that's more likely is rather than them adjusting Conquest, it would just be an incorporation of sideboards in a completely different mode altogether.
Yeah.
See, I actually think completely different mode is probably less likely. One of the things these games tend to be very wary of is dividing their player base among more queues. I was actually really surprised that they gave us as many Conquest queues as we have, because like there's effectively 4 queues in the client on the last week compared to the one that we had previous. And I don't know, from a matching time perspective, the player base seems healthy enough that I never wait on the US server where I'm at too terribly long. But I've heard people in other servers, because matchmaking is not quite fully global yet, where sometimes the wait is pretty steep.
Yeah, I had one where I waited like 5 minutes, like 1 or 2 seasons ago. But yeah, like I'm curious just how much they care about it. 6 for you, Brad. That's a bit more optimistic than I probably put myself. But my argument is like people go into conquest mode. Like Second Dinner did a huge push, right? Like there was some gaming event where like I remember Regis complained because like all they did was focus on conquest mode, right? But like it's for a certain type of player. Like give us our thing, because like Jeff, like on your stream, like you don't like playing conquest all that much.
I think it's weird to say we can't do sideboards in Conquest because Snap is supposed to be a fast game when Conquest isn't a fast game. It's not.
Agreed.
None of the incentives about how you spend your clock incentivize you to play quickly. The whole structure is just long. It's like we've already axed the Marvel Snap is fast portion of Marvel Snap for this game mode. So don't give me that as a reason not to try this, because it's already not there.
Yeah, we know you're listening, Glenn, when someone's roping for 10, 10 lives or whatever. But yeah, like, yeah, Conquest, I've been kind of like worn out by it. At the end of the season, I was saying like, I did like one run, I lost in like turn in the 5th round, and I was like, nope, this is just, like, for me, it was just way too long, way too stressful.
Yeah, well, and it kind of, it removes the fast aspect of Marvel Snap is good because it mitigates the traditional variance feel bads that basically every other card game has. It's so much easier to shrug off a bad beat when the bad beat ended your 4-minute game of Marvel Snap than the bad beat that ends my 45-minute round of Conquest or round of Magic the Gathering or whatever else I'm doing, It's all the people, how many complaint tweets have you seen people like, oh my god, ego flipped up in my round 9 of Conquest, and I was gonna come back, I swear.
Yeah.
And it's just, on the ladder, it's like not a big deal. But in there, people are like, oh, I spent 30 minutes of my life here, and then ego took over, and now I just like want to throw my phone at a wall.
Yeah, like not even. I was at because I streamed it. I got to the 5th round, and I was streaming for about 2 hours almost. So like I got to the 5th round, and then just RNG just like was like, nope, sorry, Chris. This discard deck is gonna beat you. So I don't know.
I lost to a discard deck in my 5th game too, twice.
Discard decks. Now we're over here buffing strong guy and whatnot. Jeez.
People talk about Loki and stuff, like the reworks to discard that they have done. That deck is consistently one of the best things you can play in them. It's like Destroy, right? Like, and I feel like this is a testament to their balance. Like, I don't think I've ever heard anybody complain about Destroy decks and like this needs to be nerfed or this is overpowered. They just like added some pieces and got them to a good point. They play a consistent game plan and you can interact with them. And I feel like Discard has hit that kind of perfect stride too, where it's just like, I don't really feel too cheated. Usually, like, sometimes they'll have a Dracula flip, but usually they're pretty deterministic, and they're consistent at what they do, and they just put out good stats game and game.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like, just circling back, just to wrap this thing up, like, what I've always told people is just have faith in Second Dinner, right? Like, they know what they're doing. They're not just going to leave a card busted. They're not going to leave a meta broken. Like, the longest was, like, the Shuri, right? But like now with the OTAs and even this new technology where we're seeing with Mobius, like they can do things, and like I don't know, I just want people to chill and be like, hey, they're looking at, they want to keep you playing.
I think card gamers especially are just so hurt from other card games, leaving cards rot in both directions. Like, it's common for the overpowered thing to stay overpowered for forever, and it's also common that like whatever bad card was created just stays bad in perpetuity and never gets touched again. And the fact that like Second Dinner's like, nah, you know what we're going to change? We're going to make sure Blade is playable. Like, they didn't have to do that. They didn't make any money making Blade playable. It's a series 1 or 2 card or wherever you get it. But they were like, no, we want this card to be functional and reasonable, and it could help this archetype. Let's do it. Let's make sure these cards have a purpose.
But they still won't buff Punisher, you know? Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Do you have something on Punisher?
I was gonna say,
you really want to use Punisher, Jeff. I know you do. So
I poked Glenn about Punisher the other day, and maybe share a little bit what my inkling from the conversation I had with him is. He's not convinced that just changing numbers on that card makes it playable. And one of the things that they try to do with their over-there updates is, one, they try not to make too many changes all at once, which means when they make a change, they want it to be a meaningful change, right? Like, there's a bunch of cards I think you could point out where, like, if you add 1 to their stat line, they're better, but they're still not going to get played. They're still not going to be best in slot in any deck. So it's like, at that point, sure, you buffed the bad card, but it's still the bad card and your buff was basically wasted. Like, you used one of the 5 changes you wanted to make it an OTA, making a non-card still be a non-card. And from that perspective, I can see it. I would love to play with the Punisher, but I'm not sure you can fix it with numbers, and neither was Glenn from my conversation with him.
What do you think, Brad? Maybe from a flavor perspective, get him like in the Destroy or something. He likes to
I don't know.
Stuff.
Like, I think he's one of those cards. Like, I mean, it's kind of funny that you could argue that rework that they gave to Nebula could be fitting with Punisher in a way. Actually, technically, you could argue the old Nebula would be pretty cool with Punisher, where he blows himself up too. Like, he just doesn't care.
Nebula. Wait, are we talking about Warhead?
Oh, Warhead.
I'm sorry, Negasonic, not Nebula. I apologize.
What Nebula changed? Where was I?
Whatever. Negasonic. But yeah, either one of those. I don't know. Punisher is weird because, like, same thing with Captain America. But I would argue Captain America is way more playable than Punisher is, because I could even play. Yeah. I've tried Captain America in like Spectrum decks, and I'm collection complete playing in Post Infinite or Conquest or whatever, and it's like perfectly fine. I have no qualms with it. I think it's a fine card. It works because you have agency in what you're doing around it. Where Punisher's like, well, I hope they play a bunch of cards here. It's kind of like Mojo, right? But at least with Mojo, I can go turn 1 Ant-Man, turn 2 Mojo, turn 3 Jean Grey, and like eventually Mojo's probably going to get turned on, right?
And this comes full circle back to what we were talking about with Mobius. Is 2 to 3 a big deal? 2-drops are kind of free, right? Like things that you're playing on 2 have so much less impact on average, which is why Mobius being a 2/3 was a huge deal, and why something like Jeff the Baby Landshark sees so much play, right? Because you just get so much out of that card at 2 compared to the other things that you could typically be doing in that energy spot.
So all they got to do is take Punisher down to a 2-drop. Fixed?
I pushed hard for a 2/1 and Glenn seemed unconvinced, so he might be right. But I if Hoogland was in charge of the OTAs, we'd have a 2/1 Punisher. Is all I'm saying.
So just turn that little knob. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Jeff. Once again, for the folks out there, where can they find you? What's your streaming schedule and all that?
I am live typically Monday through Friday during the week from about 9 a.m. Central until about 3 or 4 p.m. Central in the afternoon on twitch.tv/Jeff Hoogland, as well as youtube.com/Jeff Hoogland. Great place to find me making and yelling and chatting about all sorts of Marvel Snap related stuff.
It's a party. Come hang out. Brad, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter, YouTube, all that good stuff at Bradsifer. It's easy. You're here every week. You know this shit by now. Chris, You have anything going on?
Nope. Everything's linked down in the description below. I'm gonna try to do more videos now with the winter time, but we'll see. So yeah, everything's down in the description. That's all you gotta look for. But yeah, thanks again, Jeff, and we'll do this again sometime.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
All right, do I gotta do my shit? All right, we're doing my shit real quick. We love you. We appreciate you. You guys are amazing. You are always the best. We are always happy to do this every single week. And as my pastor used to say, may our faces shine on you and be gracious to you. May we look on you in favor and give you our peace while you give us your thanks. Bye-bye.
Peace out.